Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and Arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 144, cover dated April 1981. So John Byrne has left the X-Men, and in his stead, this is the new interior artist, at least for one issue. Brent Anderson on the cover, inked by Josef Rubinstein. And it features Despair here, and Man-Thing here, and Cyclops, of course, in the middle of it all. Launching out one of his magenta coloured optic blasts. So it's a pretty cool cover. I can see some Neil Adams influence behind it, and also an attempt maybe to imitate John Byrne's style. John Byrne, of course, himself influenced by Neil Adams, something that's clear to see when he's inked by himself or Tom Palmer, different from Terry Austin. So the cover caption says "Cry Despair," guest starring the macabre Man-Thing. And this is a follow-up, a type of sequel to an issue of Marvel Team Up number 68, which was actually produced by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and we do get a splash page here. The title of the story is Even in Death, and the creative team: Chris Claremont, writer; Brent Anderson, guest penciler; Josef Rubinstein, inker. And Rubinstein is coming on board as the main inker, or the the regular inker of the title, replacing Terry Austin. And then the steadfast creative team members, Glynis Wine, colorist, and Tom Wasikowski, letterer, still on board. So obviously the Man-Thing here emerging from the swamp. And who is this man in the foreground? And you can just, if you pay attention there, see just to the other side of his right knee, the barrel of a gun. From the hospital, Jock Forrester came here to the swamp he'd known and loved since childhood to make the most important decision of his life. To fight this disease, he's got a cancer diagnosis, and pray that some miracle might save him, or end things quickly, cleanly, in his own way, his own time. So his fear is attracting the Man-Thing, because we'll get an explanation in Claremont's narrative captions in relation to how the Man-Thing works, because this is the Jim Shooter era of comics, and every comic could be a reader's first. So he's there, he's holding his head in his hands, and he's remembering his dead wife, and saying, "Why couldn't I have died with you? I wanted to. Why now, Lord? Why this way? It's so unfair." So this is actually quite a emotionally fraught opening to this issue. It's kind of like a horror comic, which is what the Man-Thing series was and the character was. And then we get in the narrative captions: nearby, unnoticed in the shadows, something stirs. Once this was a biologist named Ted Sallis, transformed by a freak accident into a mindless, misshapen mockery of humanity called the Man-Thing. He's an empath. He responds to the emotional resonances of the beings around him. Negative and violent emotions cause him pain, fear, the worst pain of all. Drawn by Jock's sorrow, he means to end it, if necessary, by destroying the source. You know what we need is we need a digital version of Man-Thing that would basically destroy the whole of social media with all its negativity, all its sorrow, anger, and fear, because that's mostly how the thing works. I'm not on social media. This is my only exposure to what one gets from social media in terms of interacting with people, strangers you don't know. And, social media. A boon for humanity in the 21st century? I don't think so. So Man-Thing approaches Jock. Jock is checking the bullets in his revolver, and he's getting ready to blow his brains out. And here's the thing, you're thinking, this is a Comics Code approved comic, and is he going to do it? Yeah, he does. He blows his brains out. Now the point of view switches to the shrubbery around him, and then some creature has been influencing him somewhat, and it's this thing here. Again, I don't know why, but the social media analogy just pops into my mind in terms of those algorithms just rewarding despair, sorrow, anger, all the negative emotions. So up pops this personification of despair. He's a demon, the embodiment of the ultimate evil, and he's played his hand in Jock shooting himself. But just before he blows his brains out, he says, "Lee, I..." So do we know a Lee Forrester? Yes, she was introduced in the previous issue. Now, Man-Thing goes after Despair, and this picks up on their previous battle in Marvel Team Up 68. His mere presence flays the Quag Beast with white-hot lashes of psychic energy and goads him to instant murderous action. Man-Thing, what a pleasant surprise. He's been ironic, of course, yes. And then they fight, but Despair explains here, "Fool, have you forgotten how I almost destroyed you when last we met?" Marvel Team Up 68. "Whatever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch, and Despair can make you feel absolute terror." So Man-Thing goes on fire. Instantly and possibly the muck monster explodes into flames, and then Despair transforms into the appearance of Jock Forrester, and he says, "I feed on living souls, man brute, and my hunger is insatiable." Okay, and then the scene switches, and look at this. This is a great establishing shot here. A lot of work on this by Brent Anderson. I imagine he was working with some photo reference for this. And I like the captions from Claremont setting the scene. Midway down the west coast of Florida is the fishing port of Shark Bay, and tied up to the Cannery Wharf this fine winter afternoon is the trawler Arcadia. She's been at sea a month, scouring the Gulf and the Atlantic fishing grounds, and she's returned with a full hold. A most successful trip. That's not surprising. Arcadia is a fine ship skippered by Elitis Forrester, Jock's only child, one of the best captains on the coast, and her crew is superb. I always like that device of Claremont's where he takes you to all these interesting locations in the States, but also globally, and gives you these kinds of descriptions that sum the place up and give you a little insight into their character and maybe even their economic base. Very interesting, that aspect of Claremont's writing. So then here's the ship's crew taking out the haul of fish from the what is it called again? The hold of the ship. And one of them there, just look at his glasses, ruby quartz glasses. Who could it be? It's Scott Summers, of course, because he got a job with Lee Forster in the previous issue, 143. So there's a bit of banter here with this old sea dog who squares up to Cyclops, and Lee, the skipper, intervenes and explains to the guy here, Paolo, why Summers was hired. "Because he's beautiful, Paolo," she says, "and I'm tired of seeing nothing but you guys, ugly mugs. Shake hands, both of you, and get back to work. We've got a boat to unload." So they apologize to each other, and the crew there laughs at them. That's a nice little scene there. Also, it seems to me like Brent Anderson is using photo reference. He's referencing some specific person for this guy's quote-unquote ugly mug. Then later, out on the dock, Lee invites Scott for dinner with the crew. And so Scott makes his reluctant way to the local tavern, where he and his crewmates consume one of the finest seafood dinners he's ever tasted. I like that detail because you're not seeing anything about their dinner in the panel itself. So I like the way that Claremont is adding something. He's not adding narrative caption that just reiterates what you're looking at in the panel. He's adding something that you haven't seen. And that's a nice combination of the writer's contribution to the story and the artist complementing each other. So Scott there is reading a letter from home. Such prosaic things, yet so important to me. The X-Men are my family. No matter where I go, what I do, I'll never break the ties that bind us. He's taken a leave of absence since Jean Grey's death. Suicide. They had an eventful Christmas, I see. Kitty Pryde Sprite single-handedly defeated some sort of horrible monster. That was the previous issue. On that note, let's segue up the coast to Professor Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters just outside New York City, where the X-Men are busy cleaning up after Kitty's battle with the demon in the previous issue. So here they are working together in tandem. That's a nice shot of Wolverine from Brent Anderson. Actually, all of his figure work is really good. You can see it here on this page as well in particular. And I was thinking about this, like, look at the size of the figures. So this is, very fine detail drawing them at this size. But also, this is, and it's being commented on by other comics commentators in the past, in particular the cartoonist kayfabe crew, Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg, that novice artists in their first works will not vary the shots. So you get all of these kind of mid-range shots where you get full figures packed into the panels. And it's a little bit of a sign of a young artist trying to pack too much in to the comic. And also a little later on, I'm going to show you some pages where Brent Anderson's, he's just gotten into comics, so that's what's happening here, where Brent Anderson's work, his layout in particular, just doesn't work, and also where he's probably struggling with Claremont's plot in order to tell the story on the pages. But in any case, what happens here is Kitty's brought some sandwiches to the X-Men who are cleaning up the danger room after her battle with the demon, and then Wolverine and Nightcrawler pretend to be scared of her because she's such a badass taking on that demon, and she doesn't like being mocked, and so she flounces out of the danger room, dropping the sandwiches on the floor, and out she goes into the cold winter grounds, and Nightcrawler comes out to meet her. And I like the detail that he's wearing a jacket there as well, even though his costume is supposed to insulate him from the cold, but it makes for this really nice visual, particularly in this panel, of the kind of the woolly outside of the hood of his coat. So he apologizes to Kitty. She says, she's okay. I know, I'm not hurt, she says. And Nightcrawler says aloud, in truth, we all couldn't be more proud of you, of the way you handle yourself. None of us could have done better. But she walks away without saying anything, and he thinks to himself, she hears yet does not listen. How could I have been so unthinking, so cruel? Did I mean to hurt her unconsciously? Because, of course, in this era, Kitty is kind of taken aback by Nightcrawler's demonic appearance. And so she hasn't warmed up to him yet, as she will in subsequent years. And he's wondering to himself whether he meant to hurt her unconsciously as a kind of like a tit for tat in relation to that. Very interesting. I like that characterization from Claremont. Always the characterization is progressing issue to issue from Claremont's pen. Then we're back at the bar where Scott and the crew are having some downtime, and they're playing a game of pool there, a round of 8-ball. So their attention is taken by the TV, the sports on the TV, the American football, and Scott uses it just to keep his optic blast skill honed, potting all the balls on the table with just one delicate nudge of his optic blast. And then he says to the lads when they turn around, I'm just warmed up, guys, shall we begin? I like the shot here of the phone in the foreground, the payphone in the foreground. And then Lee explains that she's just got a phone call from her dad at his place in Citrusville. She thinks something's wrong, and she asks Scott, will he accompany her on the trip? And he agrees. Within the hour, they're scooting inland through the Everglades in Lee's airboat. Again, Brent Anderson definitely using photo reference for that. Looks good. So they arrive at the ancestral homestead, as Lee explains, but then she explains further. She says, Dad worked like a dog to give Mom and me the good life. Then when the time came to reap the fruits of his labour, Mom died. He never got over that. Her death left a void in his heart that nothing since has ever really filled. And of course, this is interesting because this chimes with Scott's recent loss of Jean Grey. And will that be his future? He says here, he pauses, know the feeling. So Lee calls out to her daddy's at the top of the stairs there, but he is not her dad anymore. It's despair. And he says, Pop. I like this, by the way. I like the storytelling here where she's hugging him, with full feeling, and his arms are just limp at his side. And he says, Pop killed himself this morning. I helped him do it. And despair there with that skull face on him. Yeah, he's quite a monstrous type figure. So he knocks Lee over the banister onto the ground. Scott catches her just in time. And he knows it's time to get out of there fast. Because Cyclops is strategic minded and he knows that they're potentially in trouble, and the best thing is to back away and figure out what's going on. But despair has already caught them. You're in my domain, humans, he shouts. You will leave when I'm done with you, not before. So this black tower, obsidian tower as it's called, pops up out of nowhere. They're in another dimension. Now, children, the fun begins. So What happens here in this panel is despair is going to send Scott into his past and the most traumatic moments of his life. So we have this interesting transition here in the panel. These borders cut into the panel, and Scott finds himself struck blind, deaf and dumb. When his sense is clear, he does not believe where he is, or who he is, or what is happening to him, yet he knows this is the truth. So here he flashes back to the airplane accident that robbed him of his parents, and he has never remembered this to this point. Horror-struck, Scott Summers comes face to face with memories hidden from him for over half his life. The boy screams. The 10-year-old boy tried his best to be brave. The woman is his mother, Anne. The boy beside him, his 6-year-old brother, Alex. So she gives them the one parachute. They jump out of the plane. With that, Catherine Ann Summers shoves her children out the hatch. A few seconds later, the Mosquito blows up, the plane being flown by his father. Scott hears the explosion, but he does not look back. He pulls the ripcord as his father taught him, wrapping arms and legs tightly around Alex so the shock of the canopy opening won't yank his brother out of his grasp. But oh no, the debris from the exploded plane burns through the canopy of the parachute. They fall, and Cyclops awakes to find he's somewhere else. And he's in costume, and he says, I remember, Mom, Dad, Alex, all of it, I remember. So he's got that blocked memory back. And this is the first time that the reader has seen all of this in comics. So this is interesting fleshing out of Scott Summers' backstory by Chris Claremont. And in this era, Scott Summers was Chris Claremont's favorite character in the X-Men. So then he's back in a scene from X-Men number 59, back in 1969. The Roy Thomas, Neil Adams X-Men. It's the finale of the Sentinels storyline. And he thinks to himself, my visor, this is my old costume and I know this place. It's the mountain headquarters of Larry Trask. What is happening to me? So he stands surrounded by the original X-Men, all save his brother Alex. The superhero Havoc are dead. And echoing through the vast underground complex, he can hear the lead-footed approach of their murderers. But they turn out to be robot versions of the all-new Uncanny X-Men. So Scott thinks to himself, am I dreaming? Am I insane? Those robots look like the X-Men. And Havoc says, they butchered our friend Scott and the woman I love, and Havoc is going to pay them back in kind. So the two brothers attack these robot sentinel X-Men. So something is bizarre is going on here. But what's interesting is Claremont's decision to revisit X-Men number 59, because in Claremont's own history, back in 1969, January and February of 1969, Claremont was an office intern, an unpaid office intern or gopher at Marvel Comics in New York. And he was in the offices when Roy Thomas was there trying to figure out an ending to X-Men 59, what to do with the Sentinels. And Claremont suggested that the sun must be the source of all mutation, and therefore Thomas got the idea to send the Sentinels into the sun to be destroyed, because that's their prime directive, to rid the earth of mutants. So they follow that logic and go into the sun. And Claremont then had the delight of seeing Neil Adams' rendering of that outcome in the make-ready copies that were available in Marvel Comics before the issues went out to the printers. So that must have been something for him, and he's calling back to his very first contribution to the X-Men mythos here by revisiting events from X-Men 59. So what happens, of course, is that Scott destroys these robot X-Men, but his brother Alex is killed by the Colossus one, and he thinks to himself, someone must be playing mind games, trying to drive me mad. You ignore the obvious big brother, and then they all come back from the dead, that you really truly are mad. On the other hand, this could be reality. Suppose our consciousness, Scott, our souls, had been transplanted into the Sentinels' forms. Suppose, Bub, that by destroying them you killed us. That's a great sequence of panels there by Brent Anderson. So Scott is surrounded, and then the scene shifts again. Again, that device of cutting borders into the panel. So now the new locale is also achingly familiar. It brings instant memories, and those memories pain. So despair is hitting him in all these key traumatic moments in his history. The voice behind him, it's Jean Grey. So they embrace. He believes now because he wants to believe. This is incredible, fantastic. And then they find themselves transported to a church. It's a nice interior of this Gothic architecture church by Brent Anderson. And then they're walking up the aisle. He's wearing a tuxedo over his costume. Strangely, he accepts this like he would in a dream as he and Jean Grey start up the aisle. And she goes through all her various costumes and identities, ending with Dark Phoenix. So they arrive at the altar, and she says, "You've known me in all my incarnations, darling. Which of us did you love the best?" So he hesitates. He says, "Be careful, Scott. The wrong answer," turn the page, "will cost you dearly." So she really is this huge version of Dark Phoenix. But then they're back at the altar. She's in a wedding dress there. And these are a couple of pages where the layouts don't work by Brent Anderson. So we go here to here. And Scott is thinking to himself, as Phoenix, Jean's power was almost limitless. She saved the entire universe from destruction. He's thinking back to X-Men 108. When she saved the universe from the Macran crystal. Is it so impossible to believe that she could then save her own life? So he's wondering if this truly is real. Professor X is the celebrant at the wedding. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here. And then we go over here and down here. So this is kind of the weird layout where naturally you might want to go from here to here rather than here to here. So it's a weird layout. And again, another one on this page. This one even less successful, I think. So Jean takes off his visor and tells him, "Open your eyes, Scott, nothing will happen." But then he blasts her with his optic beam. It's his worst nightmare come to pass. Despair is there to feed on his hopelessness. Cyclops has known fear before, but this is different. As his demon foe reaches through his mind to his soul and shrivels them both, in terror he runs. And so he falls out the side of the tower. And when his headlong flight takes him out a window, halfway up Despair's mile-high tower. And you see, this is it. So we go from here, and then we have to go here, and then down here. But it's a bizarre layout. Strange one. And again, I think this is down to Brent Anderson struggling to get Claremont's plot out on the page, which is something that happens with artists who work with Claremont for the first time in this era. He's got big plots, and it's tough for these novice artists to break it down and tell the story clearly with clear layouts. So then he's on the ground there, but he lives, and he fears no. He decides otherwise. Despair made me feel like this. I can beat this. I must. Man-Thing manifests behind him. A monster I'll destroy with my optic blasts. I like the open border panel here. That's a nice choice from Anderson. But Scott thinks to himself, stop it, what's the matter with me? He decides against blasting the Man-Thing. Let's get past these ads. And he thinks, am I so panicked that I've forgotten my training? I never unleash my beams against any less than a definite foe, a definite attack. This creature isn't after me. It's heading for Despair's temple. Definite spelt wrong there. But is it after the demon or Lee? Just thinking about going back in there scares me silly, but I have to do it. So now here he is back at his heroic best, putting on his costume, putting the visor on. He hears Lee scream. He goes back into her father's house. There's Despair attacking her psychically. The Man-Thing enters the building also, and then they attack each other. And Cyclops attacks Despair, only to see the demon appear to teleport like Nightcrawler all around the room, laughing sadistically as he blasts the Quag Beast again and again. You know, that's interesting. Just that little simile there, like Nightcrawler all around the room. At this point, Claremont is teasing maybe what might be Nightcrawler's origins. He's thinking about that in respect of Mystique in the Days of Future Past storyline, where Nightcrawler was marveling at how Mystique looked like him. And now this business of Nightcrawler teleporting like this demon. So is Nightcrawler of demonic parentage? it's interesting how he's seeding that in the narrative exposition here. And so Cyclops, this is a nice pose on Cyclops by Brent Anderson. Interesting use of a colour hold here as well for Despair as he's blasting him with his optic blast, and then he thinks he's gone. I wonder why he didn't use his fear zap on me this time, unless fear isn't precisely what he's after. So Cyclops has figured it out, but merely a means to an end. His name itself gives me one clue. And during the hallucinations he created, every tragedy was geared not to make me afraid, but to make me lose hope. So he's nailed it. If that's so, then I think I know how to fight him. So Cyclops draws on a most personal, painful memory, his first sight of Dark Phoenix. Gambling that his despairing fear of his transfigured love will draw despair to him. His emotions are not feigned. Indeed, they are so real, so intense that they attract Man-Thing. So Claremont adding something in here that we don't see in the art really, unless we see Man-Thing kind of behind him. But despair reaches Scott first, more fool he, and Scott grabs him. You cannot hold me, human, or defeat me, says Despair. Then escape, demon, says Scott. If I'm so weak and you're so strong, surely you can do that. But you can't. Your power's broken with me, Despair. I still feel fear, as do all living things, but I don't let that fear rule me. I don't despair. So this is Cyclops working through his grief and bereavement over the loss of Jean Grey. And it's interesting that Claremont is achieving that through this sequel to an old Marvel team-up story. And so Man-Thing now goes after Despair. The swamp monster set Despair afire, thinks Cyclops. It's tearing the demon apart. The creature set the house ablaze. If I don't blast a way out of here fast, Lee and I are finished. So he gets out. He's at the little hover craft, and the whole house explodes, taking the swamp monster with it. So Cyclops was going to go back in and try and rescue Man-Thing. Forget it. If they're still inside that Holocaust, they're both dead. Lee and I came too close to joining them. The demon's fatal mistake was attacking me through my memories of Jean. Through her, I faced the best and worst of humanity. I learned the true meaning of courage and of love. Yielding to you, Despair, would have been the ultimate denial and betrayal of that love. Once I realized that, I knew I'd die before I'd let you have that kind of victory. At that moment, you were beaten. So interesting that Claremont follows up his last collaboration with John Byrne on the X-Men, where Byrne's plot was Kitty Pryde alone on Christmas Eve facing off against a demon, and he follows it up with his own story of his favourite character, Scott Summers' Cyclops, facing a demon too, and beating his demons in this issue, and overcoming his hopelessness after the suicide death of Jean Grey, and then taking that leave of absence from the X-Men. So in terms of finding himself again, he's overcome that despair he felt after Jean's death. By dawn, the fire is out, so Claremont wraps up the story here with the Swamp Thing manifesting again. The Man-Thing rises whole and unharmed from the ashes of the house. True, he was trapped in the heart of the fire. True, it consumed him as it did the mansion, but the Quag Beast was created as much by sorcery as science. The swamp gave him birth, the swamp sustains him. And so long as he remains within its vast confines, he's virtually immortal. He pauses, seeking some sense of despair, and finding none departs for a time. Silence reigns. Then soft, malefic laughter breaks the stillness to echo out across the face of the world. Then we get a quote here. So long as there is hope, it must be balanced by despair. We can reduce him for a time, but while there is life itself, he will exist. Dakeem the Enchanter. There you go. So an interesting first essay, or not essay, but comic by Claremont, X-Men comic, plotting solo without Byrne. And then we get Claremont on the letters page here, talking about the fill-in artist here, Brent Anderson. A welcome aboard for the new regular inker, Josef Rubinstein. And then down the bottom here, another important thing is he's talking about his 50th issue of the X-Men. In the better late than never department, a couple or three announcements. To begin, a belated celebration, my 50th anniversary on this crazy book, which just happens to coincide with the 50th issue of the new X-Men to see print. Trouble is, it was last issue, and that was the Byrne plotted issue. Ah, well, he says, here's hoping we're all around for 50 more, and indeed they were. Next issue, we herald the return of the man who helped create this phenomenon in the first place, Dave Cockrum. So Cockrum coming on board as new regular penciler with Josef Rubinstein on inks. One last thing to check out here is the statement of ownership, which gives the sales figures. So down here we have average number of copies each issue during preceding 12 months, 345,000. Single issue nearest to filing date, 349,940. So 350,000 copies of X-Men being published every month now. So the sales going up on the basis of how hot this book had become with the Dark Phoenix saga in particular. There you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 144. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, leave a comment on the video as well. Tell me what you think of the contents of the video. And also, if you haven't joined the channel already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.